Hello and welcome to the Believe in People podcast. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today I have with me Peter and we talk about the reality of heroin withdrawal, powder power and the hierarchy within drug culture, trauma-informed care and his personal experiences leading up to employment within the sector. Thank you very much for coming on today. I'm really excited to have you on because we've had some great conversations in the past about everything and anything, really, haven't we? Sometimes it's like I'll meet you for about 10 minutes, and then an hour later we're still gabbing about something. So it's nice to have you on here. Obviously, today we're going to be talking more about you than a lot of the things we normally talk about. More about you, and I suppose your recovery. And even the funny thing with you is even where it's like recovery, you don't necessarily accept or. I'm trying to think of the word to say for it.
I'm in recovery at the moment.
Would you consider...
I'm in recovery from COVID.
Okay, yeah, there you are. Do you consider yourself in recovery from substance abuse or...?
Well, obviously I do, in as much as...
in the sense of...
Now I do.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like that so often people really have that badge of recovery, and wear it like a badge of honour, whereas with you it seems quite secondary to a lot of who you are, really.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I kind of feel a little bit that way myself.
Yeah. I think it's just one of the things. Some people, it's for some people, when they achieve recovery, it becomes their entire identity.
Yeah.
I've never once had that with you. I think there's so much about you that I can, and it's part of the reason why we end up talking as much as we do. We can unpick things for hours, but for the purposes of today, we are going to be talking about your recovery in the traditional sense, and because you used drugs for a long time.
I did.
A very long time. How long was you using substances for?
Of various types, probably from the age of about 17 was the first time that I ever used anything other than alcohol, right up to... I did my methadone detox when I was 56, I think.
It's a long period of
time.
You see,
I don't even keep a date particularly.
No, and some people
have
really
like a
do,
recovery
don't they?
birthday,
Recovery birthdays and could get it tattooed to them, do you know?
I just think it's all part of life's rich tapestry, mate. I'm not one, and this is a weird thing to say in the modern world, but I'm not particularly one for too readily defining myself, particularly. I get all manner of labellings and stuff I detest.
Well, this is it, we'll label
So I think quite often people can use words to label, which in the end diminishes people, I think.
Well, do you know what? I've had this conversation with you before, but for, I suppose for a culture of people that often hate being labelled, the label of recovery is something, and addiction and addict is something that, is worn with pride and is a completely different kettle of fish, isn't it?
There's all sorts of things that are worn with pride in the modern world that I just see as ill definition, for want of a better word.
So using substances at 17, what was the first substance you used? Was it alcohol at 17 or...?
No, I think the first substance I ever used was, one particularly a substance, it was a completely natural phenomenon. It was magic mushrooms. I suppose it was the first thing.
Yeah. So it was hallucinogenic drugs was the first.
Hallucinogenic drugs, yeah.
Introduction to it. And was that when you were 17 then?
17, yeah.
What brought that on?
At the time, it was like I say, it was before the sort of mass consumption of drugs amongst the working classes. It was like not a thing that many people did, and I think it was a lot to do with the circle of friends I hung about with. We were all interested in alternative types of music. We all read alternative types of literature. So I just think we all had sort of exploratory heads, for want of a better word, because it was very much that sort of, it was like we couldn't wait to explore the possibilities of bending our minds and all that sort of stuff. That's how it sort of started with us, and there was very few of us who did it. It was, and we were all sort of eventually. We were in the sixth form at the time, so it was like people who ended up going on to university. I mean, like one of the lads who I used to do magic mushrooms with back in the early days is now a kind of top psychiatric nurse. Very few of them actually descended into what you'd call descended into drug addiction or anything like that. So it was just, I think it was like, because I remember reading recently about these days, up to 70% of young people go through what's the term, a rites of passage exploration of some sort of drug use. And I think it was just that we first where the shoes were. But I think there was a lot of social influence as well because of the type of music that we were listening to, the type of literature, because I was mad on things like the Beat Generation, which was an awful lot about drug use and stuff like that. The sort of music we listened to, our sort of pop idols were all drug users. So I think there was an element of social influence there.
So obviously you're 50s now, so was this 70s, early 80s?
This will be in the 80s, yeah. But interestingly, I can remember, because I did English lit at school, and I can remember, I think I've told you this before, I remember when we were doing a practical criticism on a particular poet, one of the Romantic poets, Coleridge, who did a famous poem called Kubla Khan, which was basically about his vision as well under the influence of opiates. Like all the Romantic poets was all into the opiates. It was at that period in history. And I remember real distinctly in class saying to the teacher, that sounds, I nearly swore, but that sounds amazing.
You can swear if you want, don't worry about it.
I can't wait to have a go.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of laughed off. And I just sometimes think to myself, if a young kid said that in a class today, that'd be like a red flag, and they'd probably be talked to at the end of the class, maybe, you've got to go see a child psychologist or whatever. So I just think there was an awful lot of naivety then about drugs and stuff like that. It just wasn't the social phenomenon that it is today.
You're the generation, I suppose, that that's what you got 67. Yeah, do you know you're a generation. You're not your entire generation, but it was a lot more normal to use substances in your generation, wasn't it? Like in your youth.
I think we were a bit before that, to be honest.
Was you?
Yeah, I think. Like I say, when we first started using drugs, it was. I remember there was a little. Actually, I've just realised that the first time I ever used drugs was actually before that.
Yeah.
I remember because this was when I was in the sixth form, when I'd already turned into a bit of a hippie. And
I was going to ask you, was you a hippie? But then I just said about labelling.
I was more of a.
I don't want to ask. Was you a hippie?
I was more of a late 60s kind of. I was more of a psychedelic kind of guy. But I was very influenced by sort of 60s culture and stuff like that. So I was into early Pink Floyd and all that sort of stuff. So it was more what they used to call psychedelic music. Do you know what I mean? But I remember just before that, because when I was younger, there was a lot of, with youth culture, there was a lot of tribal stuff. So you defined yourself by what tribe you was in. So, and I used to just switch from one thing to another, mate. So one minute I was a Northern Soul boy, then I was a mod, and I was a hippie. Yeah. So, I used to change with the tide. But thinking about it, the first time I ever came across drugs was when I was into Northerns. You see, this is the point, there was that much social influence then from youth culture. Yeah. So the first time I think I ever came across drugs was via Northern Soul, and it was sort of speed tablets, believe it or not. Yeah. It's like, it was the period when you could still get amphetamines from the doctor for slimming and things like that. Do you know what I mean? And then when modism came in, there was a lot of barbiturates about them, they were a very, very dangerous drug. They're completely, I mean, you can hardly ever, I don't think you never see them anymore, barbiturates. So I just think it was always a part of kind of youth culture, to be honest. Depending on what tribe you was in, that sort of influenced what sort of drug you used. Yeah. But I'd never really, I mean, I remember taking a couple of speed tablets and not liking them. So it never made a big deal about that. And when I was a mod, I remember taking a few down, as I can't actually remember what they are, but they were probably barbiturates. Yeah. So it was proper dicing with everything, because I remember barbiturates, you could literally take 5 or 6 and overdose, and barbiturates are one of the drugs that are responsible for most of the deaths in the 27 Club, I think, like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. And, you know, so... But the first drug I enjoyed, is what I should have said, was magic mushrooms. Yeah. Was a trip, man.
You just said about the way doctors used to prescribe, amphetamines for weight loss and stuff. We've spoken about this before, but I think for a lot of people your age, their first introduction to drugs, and this is what based on what we've spoken about before, was based on what doctors was prescribing.
This is the point.
Mums.
Yeah.
Like
this
your
is why
parents,
especially when you look at the demographic of a lot of the persistent drug users, shall we call them, in services at the moment. A lot of them are older, like certainly above 45, certainly the opiate users, and a lot of them are older than 50. And I think when people start to use the notion of cannabis as a gateway drug, that certainly was not my experience. From my experience, the first cannabis didn't come in, it was just not a popular drug at all until probably weed came into, well, there was a lot of cannabis resin about and stuff like that, but most people I know who ended up long-term drug users, their introduction to drugs was most definitely pharmaceuticals, that they would pilfer from parents' medicine cabinets. That's genuinely my experience.
Yeah.
Because whether cannabis is now a gateway drug is a different argument, but I'm talking about the
yeah, of course,
demographics
yeah.
when
I mean,
I
well,
first
to be
started.
honest, I've had interesting conversations about gateway drugs in the past, and it, you know, you could argue alcohol. Most people have had alcohol before they ever have cannabis. If you want, I know obviously the legalities of it all and stuff like that, but if you argued anything, you'd be talking alcohol would be your gateway drug. But for the most part, the people I speak to, it's been often some sort of like trauma that's been the gateway into using heavier substances.
But I think this is a phenomenon that happened kind of later on, though, because certainly from my early experiences with drugs, I don't. You see, because I think the major drug problems started happening when drugs entered enormously amongst the working classes. You know what I mean? But when we first started using drugs, it was much more of a, for want of a better expression, middle class thing. It was more linked with, like I say, things like music and literature. And that, like we used to go to Spiders and Silhouette, places like that, where there was an awful lot of drugs being used. But I don't think there were so many drugs being used at Romeo's or even places like Henry's and places like that. That was more alcohol driven.
Do you know, I can't believe Spiders, like you just mentioned Spiders, that's still going. The rest of them aren't there.
Well,
Spiders nightclub is still going strong,
Probably
isn't
they've got
it?
the same set list.
Yeah, I imagine so, to be fair.
My nephew now goes to Spiders. He keeps encouraging me to go.
It's like, I've not been there in like 30 years.
I'm thinking of going just for the
for the laugh of it.
Touch of nostalgia and all that. Yeah.
But what sort of things were people getting from like the mother's medicine cabinet? Do you know? Because what was mother's little
Well, I think
helper
it was
or
all
something?
sorts of things. Well, mother's little helper was Valium, wasn't it? Which what's the proper name for Valium? I always forget. But yeah, Valium, things like that. And plus, there were an awful lot of. I think benzodiazepines sort of replaced barbiturates because they're a lot safer, for want of a better word.
Yeah, it's weird to say that now.
It's a weird word to use. But because barbiturates were very, very dangerous. You could literally overdose taking 5 or 6. They were a very, very dangerous drug. And I think benzodiazepines was just really, really common. It's like, and for things that I don't particularly want to go into this, but my parents' drug cabinet was full of a lot of drugs. Yeah. And I remember one that we took a particular. This isn't old because this was sort of after the psychedelic, after the magic mushrooms phase. We discovered this drug that was called Ativan, which was, I think it's in the benzodiazepine family. But again, it's a drug that's now it's nearly completely been taken off the market because it was like a hyper addictive benzodiazepine, I think. So we did get into a bit into the habit of taking that because they were just so freely available. It's like every fifth family member, every fifth friend would have a parent that was on some sort of, benzo for I don't know what they were prescribing them for.
Obviously, I mean, I've heard of the medicine cabinet story a couple of times, and I just wonder, do you think? Did your parents notice you was taking these?
Yeah, this is where I'm starting to share some. I will talk about this. I won't go no, but because I feel a little bit of guilt about this because it was assumed that the particular parent that they were prescribed to was taking more of this drug than they thought they were taking.
Okay. Yeah.
You see, and it wasn't only me. I had a couple. I've got a few family members that ended up using a lot of drugs. So a parent ended up taking the responsibility for our loose behaviour, so we call them.
Well, it's teenagers.
Because they assumed he was just taking more than he could remember and blah-de-blah-de. So.
Interesting stuff. Okay. When did you move on to heroin then? Like, what age was you when you first started using heroin?
I was probably late 20s. Yeah. And it was a question of availability, I think. It just wasn't around before then. Okay. Because it was sort of like the post. Because I think if you look at, I think this is right, that there's a kind of map of heroin usage across Britain, and it started off in Scotland and Liverpool, basically, and then spread across the rest of the country. So it was kind of that period. When you talk about things like social influence, I can remember in the 90s, there was this period in the 90s that was known where culture was invaded by this concept called heroin chic. Now, if you ever want to look at something interesting about social influence, you'll Google heroin chic, because it invaded all manner of popular culture, particularly modelling. So modelling was massively influenced with what was known as heroin chic, and it was when it was like the age of what was she called, the really thin model?
Twiggy?
No, a long time after that. Kate Moss.
Oh,
and it was a sort of celebration.
A long time after that,
No, but if you look at some of the images from the period of heroin chic, they literally would darken people's eyes and put makeup on so they looked like they had hollow cheekbones, and it was called heroin chic.
Wow.
I think this was actually by the sort of mid-90s, this will have been, I think. Okay. And it sort of fed into the Kurt Cobain period.
Yeah,
and all
like
that sort of
grunge
thing.
and
so
stuff.
So heroin was a kind of, there was an enormous amount of social influence, I think, to encourage, whether it was, I don't think it was conscious social influence, I just think it was about people making money, basically. I don't think people particularly give a shit or recognise the fact it might have a negative impact on society.
Did you know much about heroin before you started using it then?
Yeah, loads.
Oh, did you?
Absolutely loads, yeah.
And it didn't put you off, it didn't scare you?
Not one bit.
Did it do the opposite?
I've never been frightened about taking drugs. It's really weird.
Did it do the opposite?
Much.
Did it do the opposite? Did it?
Yeah, it made it seem more intriguing.
More appealing.
You see, because I'll be honest with you, I couldn't wait to do heroin. Yeah. It was weird. As soon as it came, because I'd got, like I say, the Beat generation. It was massively influenced by drug use. Yeah. Like there was particular writers that was influenced by amphetamines, people like Jack Kerouac, and then there was like William Burroughs, famously, was a lifelong opium user, lived into his 80s, wrote Naked Lunch. I don't know if you. Anyway,
gone.
And so I knew all about it. There was there was a famous because a lot of the Beat generation celebrated like the underworld of America. So there was like famous characters called Hook, who was a heroin addict, and he was like a major character in most of the literature of the Beat generation. So yeah, I knew an awful lot about it. Yeah. I think a lot of the people who got into heroin at the same time as me didn't, but yeah, I knew everything. I knew a lot about it. I knew about the fact you got addicted. I knew it caused withdrawal. I knew how difficult it was to get off. Yeah. Like at the time, I was obsessed with William Burroughs, and I knew he was still using opiates into his 80s. Yeah. So yeah, I knew. I absolutely. I was intellectually aware about it, shall we say? Yeah. Obviously, I didn't know about its physical effects. Didn't know about its emotional effects. Okay. But I certainly knew intellectually all about it.
How long into using heroin? Obviously, at first, not phased by it at all. You knew the dangers, you went into it anyway. At what point did you think, hang about here, this is hard to get off, I don't want to be using this anymore, but now I've got a physical dependency, I've got to go on a methadone program. At what point was all this sort of coming into your head? Because do you know what's funny? Everyone always says people say nobody chooses to be an addict. No one chooses it. But your story kind of says that.
I don't think I was looking forward to be an addict. I think I made choices to use substances without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
And but even knowing the dangers of the addictiveness.
I think that was part of the appeal, to be honest.
That's what I mean. Do you know? So they're saying nobody chooses to be an addict. This is in light almost completely changing that narrative.
Well, nobody's beyond social influence, I think, and I also think that you become what your culture makes you to an awful lot. You know? So I was kind of fooled to a certain extent.
It's glamorised, isn't it?
By a lot of popular culture and a lot of the notion of creative people, because I've regarded myself as a creative person. I used to write and draw and paint and dabble with making music and stuff like that. And the notion that, as a matter of course, creative people take drugs. This was just like, well, of course they do. I'm a creative person. All the other creative people take drugs, so kind of I'm going to... Do you know what I mean? Plus, I also think I didn't care very much, to be honest, which again I think is... You see, I've thought about the reasons why people take drugs. I've thought of the impacts of drugs on culture. This is something I've thought about all my life. I've had first-hand experience of it. I've thought about it and read about it all my life. And I still haven't come to any real definite conclusion. So I always, when people ask me about why people do drugs, I always say, my answer is usually something quite trite, like, well, if I was on QI and someone asked me that question, I'd have to hold up the nobody knows paddle, because I genuinely think nobody knows why human beings take drugs. I just think it's... Because they always have. I don't think there's been a human culture that's ever existed where some sort of mood or mind-altering substance isn't taken.
Well, alcohol, as an example, has been on for thousands of years.
Even take alcohol out the fact. When they discover a tribe in the middle of the Amazon that's got absolutely no contact with the rest of any civilization at all, you'll find that they will use some sort of indigenous hallucinogen or some sort of indigenous drug. I just think it's in human beings to do it.
Experiment.
What can you say? I just think it's you'll get a bunch of human beings and something that will alter their mood or their consciousness, and they'll use it. And it's one of them things. Whether they have to become as dangerous as they have become in our culture is a different thing. And I think the burden of that is more. You see, when people ask me about the drug problem, I think you're taking a real small part of human behaviour when you're talking about the drug problem, and it becomes a finger pointing exercise to kind of like almost judge people. Because I think there's not real such thing as the drug problem. I think we've got a chemistry problem. Do you know what I mean? So I think the real drug problem started, the problems that ended up leading to the social drug problems we've got at the moment, started with the birth of chemistry, really. I don't know if you know about you've heard about the Great Binge.
Enlighten me.
Well, there's a historical period lasted from about 1870 roughly until the drug laws were first introduced in 1918, and it's known as the Great Binge. And the reason it's called that is because chemistry was like a kind of new science, and there was all sorts of chemicals being manufactured and loads of synthetic opiates and all the rest of it. And they were literally in everything. Everyone knows the story of Coca-Cola.
Of course,
actually had real cocaine in it. Yeah. And this period is known as the Great Binge, and there were literally everyone was taking all manner of substances for all manner of things, even things like heroin. You can fact check this one, but I'm pretty sure heroin is called heroin because it was originally marketed as a drug to help with women's problems, period pains or whatever, and that's why it's called heroin, female hero. So that's why heroin got the name heroin.
I'll talk into that. That's interesting.
The drugs were just taken for all manner of things, and the chemistry had gone literally mad. And I often tell people this as well, that when people think about drug laws and they think, oh, the drug laws was introduced to combat illegal drugs on the street. Nonsense. The drug laws was introduced to legislate chemistry because of the Great Binge and the fact that chemistry had gone mad and was flooding the world with all these chemicals that were in everything. And the fact of the matter is they made things like opiate and cocaine illegal because they couldn't make all the synthetic versions of that illegal without making heroin and cocaine illegal. So really, the drug laws were introduced to legislate chemistry, not to combat some pernicious drug use. The kind of illegal drug use we've got now didn't really start until the 1960s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so people have really weird notions about why drugs were made illegal, why the drug laws were introduced. The real reason was to legislate chemistry, which had gone mad.
You've talked about, obviously, enjoying substances for a while. You used them for many, many years. What was the lowest point in that where you thought, I need to stop using substances? Did you? I asked this question to a lot of participants about a rock bottom and a low moment, and was there something where something clicked and you thought, right, I've got to get off the drugs now? Did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to paint a picture that drugs are by any means nice or a good thing to do or anything like that. Because, the fact of the matter is, I just think because of drugs, I think when I was younger, I could have kind of done anything I wanted to do. I had a lot of skills, a lot of talents and stuff like that. And instead of utilising all those, I ended up the cliche drug user alone in his bed, alone in his house, isolated, not really, no relationship, no kids, no career. So I don't think you can get much lower than that, really. This is the thing about rock bottom. I think it's a subjective thing.
Yeah.
One person's rock bottom is lunatic asylum, prison. Mine was just absolutely not doing anything with my life, just not doing anything with my own potential and stuff like that. Letting myself down, really, I suppose, was my rock bottom.
Yeah, because I mean, we've known each other years now, and I've always said, you know, you're a really intelligent bloke and stuff like that. And it is interesting to talk about this because, and even now, talking about it now, I feel like we talk a lot about your youth and a lot about where you are now. And even now, with how long I've known you, there seems to just be this massive blank part.
Yeah, because the kind
in
of is.
between. Yeah, and I guess this is what I'm kind of getting at. You know, we've spoke about family life and, you know, having children and things like that, which are again things you said. You know, for someone who, I'll use your word, you told me you're not someone who holds any real regrets, but you do.
No,
regret.
it's not that I don't hold regrets. I just think the fact of the matter is, I am what I am.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it'd be self-defeating to be too negative about how I've ended up where I am, because at the same time as not having a career, not particularly having kids, not having a lovely wife that I've known all my life and all that sort of thing that I think I missed out on because of drugs, I am where I am. Do you know what I mean? So it'd be
pointless to dwell on.
Yeah, it'd just be further self-destruction, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
To wallow too much on the negativity, because I try and be positive about it, mate, and I think when it, and I don't particularly like doing this, but when you compare yourself with a lot of people that I'd journeyed through drugs with, I didn't suffer too much. I've got to be realistic about it, and it'd be almost offensive of me to not acknowledge the fact that I never ended up in a mental institution. I never did any time in prison. I never destroyed my relationship with most of my family members. You know, I've still got my sanity. And also, even though I didn't achieve anything, but, you know, no pieces of paper or no big car or all the normal trappings that people call success, I don't think I was ever particularly lazy when I was a drug user, because I was an obsessive reader. I used to always engage the old adage about the devil finding work for idle hands. I don't ever think I kept my hands idle, because I used to do a lot of painting, and I did have a lot of sort of journals and poetry I'd written and all that sort of thing. So I don't think I was ever particularly lazy. And I again, I'm going to repeat this. I don't like to compare myself with everybody else, but when I do, I think I didn't come out too badly in the end. You know, what can you say? I mean, everyone gets a life, don't they? You've got to be realistic about it.
Well, tell you what. To go. Plus,
No, carry on. I was going to go wandering off somewhere.
No, I'd rather. Okay, are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I met you a few years ago, and you started to do some training with me to work as a peer mentor to help other people, and then you relapsed, disappeared for a few years. You've been back now. When did you? So how long you? Well, again, you said you don't have a definitive date. But how roughly have you?
It was roughly about, I'd say, getting on for about 20. Wait a minute. About 21 months ago that I did my last methadone detox.
What was different to that methadone detox to the ones you'd done previously? Because, like I said, when I met you, you know, you disappeared and you'd gone back to it for a while. What was different on that last one then? To have, because 20 months is a long time.
I just think it was the final chord in a particular symphony, shall we call it?
Yeah.
It was just time.
Yeah.
Time was just right. Yeah. To be honest, as a younger person, I don't think I particularly fitted my skin very much. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know if this is self-delusion or not, but I sometimes fool myself into thinking I was just designed to be someone in the late middle age. Because I just feel now like I fit my skin much more than I ever did in my life. Whether that was because of the drug use, and I would have found myself as a younger person if it weren't for the drug use, I can never tell, because I've only got the life I've had, so I couldn't possibly speculate. But yeah, I just think it's my own personal journey. That's the way that I look at it.
Yeah.
You know.
Was there anything particular that made you want to do it then? Not just timing. Was there external factors where you thought, right, I'm doing it this time. I'm getting clear.
The death of my father played an enormous part in it. To be honest, because I think a lot of my long-term drug use was wrapped up in that because I remember we were chatting in the car, so I was saying I didn't want to share this, but I've changed my mind. I think I'm going to. Because I don't think my dad got a fair crack in life for various reasons, largely a lot to do with. It's funny when you look at the pattern of your life, I think, and certain things keep cropping up. And one of the things that keeps cropping up in my life is the burden of responsibility that pharmaceuticals and chemistry and bad social decisions about how pharmaceuticals are used crop up quite a lot in my life. I mean, I think my father was like a victim of bad doctoring, for want of a better word. He had mental health problems, again, for want of a better expression, and was a victim of bad doctoring, I think. So I think there's an awful lot of that that's tied in with my drug use. And so when my dad finally passed, for whatever reason, I don't want to lay any blame on my father one bit, because I don't think it was anything to do with him at all. That's when I started to free myself, I think. You know, because when I was a drug user, I spent a lot of time, because I wasn't doing very much else. I didn't have a career or anything like that. So I carried the burden of caring for, because my dad was rather ill. My mother was bedridden with looking after him, and I carried a bit of that responsibility myself. So even though I was never in an official capacity as carer, I used to do an awful lot of caring for both parents, really, making sure they was all right and stuff. Little funny, kind of a funny story. Funny-ish, funny peculiar, and funny ha-ha, depending on which way you look at it. When I was at my worst as an opiate user, I used to be one of the designated people to pick up my dad's prescriptions and my mother's prescriptions. Now, there was an awful lot of opiate substances, like Oromorph. The first time I ever had a fentanyl was when my father got given fentanyl patches. So I used to pick up their opiate medications, like super strong, much stronger than the opiates I was using on the street, probably. Yeah. And I used to really responsibly pick them up all the time, never once nicked any of them or dabbled with any of them, just real responsibly used to go. So, you know, like there's some days when I'd literally be on the verge of rattling, but I'd still responsibly pick up my mum and dad's script before I went and stuff for myself and stuff like that. You're still
a good person, aren't you?
Well,
just because addicts aren't bad people.
Well, this is the point. Another thing, like especially in the early days of treatment, I remember the burden of the notion of drug addiction as moral deficiency and all this other sort of nonsense that I used to quite enjoy. Not in a public sense, but in my own personal sense, I used to think, well, I know I'm a decent person, so I know that's a load of fucking bollocks, their expression. Course, you know, so... But yeah, I just think my father's death played a massive part in... I don't want to use the word freeing me, because that sounds like I'm holding him responsible in some way. I don't.
Well, it's not the impression that I'm getting, but I think it's at the end of the day, this is your individual life and your individual story. No matter how much we talk about it over the course of this podcast, I or nobody listening to it is really going to grasp every detail of how you have lived your life, no matter how much we talk about it over this time. So to understand that situation is completely different.
I'm just aware of the fact that I don't want, I loved my own man, even though we had our differences. And he had problems because of his mental health, so some of his behaviours were quite challenging. Yeah.
But you've understood that, and so many people don't.
I very much did understand it. Yeah. You know, and as a younger person, I will admit, I was burdened by it, and I did hold resentments when I was younger, and I couldn't understand why. You know, anyway.
A lot of us,
I very soon came to the realisation that he was not responsible one tiny bit for any of it.
Well, that's it. I think we look at, not everybody by any means, but we often look at our parents as, I suppose, heroes that nothing bothers them, or like we don't understand. We just don't. it's not until you get older where you realise, hang on, they're human beings like everybody else, and they will have their own troubles.
Well,
I think about that a lot with my parents.
I sometimes think I had a kind of unconscious bitterness about the world, in as much as my early memories of my dad are that Superman sort of thing. And he was a kind of spectacular young man and spectacular young adult when I think back. I mean, he looked like Elvis for a start.
Yeah, well, there you are.
He was like a bit of a local celebrity for that reason. And I can remember he was an itinerant when he was younger. He was like a really bad flirt, and he used to flirt with all the women, and I used to love watching.
Of course.
And then to see his descent, and I think I subconsciously at the time realised that it was kind of bad doctoring. Like it was back in the period. Like I can remember my dad getting sectioned and stuff, and this was the time when they could literally strap people down and give them electric shock treatments.
Wow.
And he was on a drug called Largactil that became known as the liquid cosh, or a liquid straitjacket.
Oh, really?
And we went to visit him in Delapole. Yeah. And I've got a real early, which I suppose is quite traumatic, really, even though I've never really acknowledged it as trauma. But it was just not this stranger. This strange geezer that wasn't my dad. And I make this analogy that the bigger my dad's medicine box got, the more removed he became. Do you know what I mean? The less of a father he became and all stuff like that. And I think unconsciously I became quite bitter about the world.
How old was you when this was happening?
Well, it happened when I was quite young. My dad first, because he had a major traumatic incident. I'm sharing a lot about my dad, aren't I?
No, it's fine.
It's just I'm just aware of the fact he's not here to sort of defend himself.
I don't think you're saying anything that's. I
know, but I'm just aware of the fact I might be saying things that he might not want to share himself with the world.
Okay, yeah.
But anyway,
I get what you're saying.
Where was I?
So what I was going to say basically was. Is there obviously the age that you're saying? You said you never really acknowledged it as a trauma, and you said the medication cabinet got bigger, he got further away.
Yeah, but you don't. When you're young, you don't acknowledge it as trauma. It's just it's just
normal. It's just normal, isn't it? I always I've said this so many times. That's what I was going to explain.
My dad had a specific traumatic incident that this is the unusual thing. Because it was, as a young man, it was like proper working class bloke. Used to go out and do a proper tough guy working class job, and he witnessed his best friend dying in a work incident. It burnt to death, literally burnt to death. Because my dad used to work with cutting up old ships and things like that with an oxyacetylene torch. That's what his job was, for a big scrap metallurgy. And that, again, thinking back as your dad as a hero, he used to bring back all manner of stuff that he'd found off old ships, like huge magnifying glasses off the radar systems and these massive magnets. So it was like kind of an ideal dad. I remember him as a particularly young man. But he witnessed his best friend die, burnt to death. And at the time, the popular wisdom was if you threw water over someone that was burning to death, they'd die of shock. Now, my dad had a water hose in his hand at the time. His mate was dying, but he was discouraged from hosing him down and putting him out because he would die of shock. So we did the drop and rolls kind of thing. And then he spent a few days in hospital, ended up dying. And that was a traumatic incident that led to my dad's long-term mental health diagnoses and all that. Now, when my dad finally passed, we asked for his medical records to be released, so then we read through them and all this sort of stuff. And it was kind of acknowledged in his medical records that if that had happened today, it'd be treated as PTSD, and there'd be this very effective treatments. But the way that it did end up being it was called schizophrenic at certain points. He was clinical depression, and these were again. And it was kind of acknowledged in his medical records that it was. I don't want to repeat the word bad doctoring because I feel like I've used it so often, but it was misguided treatments in the 70s and 80s, and now it just would simply not be treated like that. And it was the treatments that led to the long-term condition rather than the actual trauma itself. Because now it'd be treated like PTSD, and you'd get treatment as for PTSD. Yeah. And I think I had an underlying bitterness about that, so I didn't care. I simply didn't care about You know, I kind of hated the world because of it.
I think, do you know what? But I completely,
in a kind of, I don't mean in a conscious sense.
No, but
in
unconscious. Yeah, no, I completely get it. I think the thing, like I said, you know, our parents at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? Again, you put them on pedestals. I think it's weird and that's the weird thing about getting older when you see them. Like even my dad now, do you know, getting in his 50s, it's just weird seeing him like he was Superman growing up.
Yeah.
And now I'm just seeing him. Do you know, he's approaching 60 now, do you know, and he's had a manual labour job for most of his life. You're starting to see the effects of it.
Yeah.
You know, his bad back and things like that. It's weird seeing him just go in that way, which is what is, I suppose, normal.
Yeah.
But bring it back to your recovery then. You never followed a 12-step program.
No.
You've never followed smart recovery.
Well, when I first was in recovery, and I was suddenly in a world where I couldn't help my old habits, we're using drugs and all that sort of stuff. So I thought I've got to do new stuff. If I don't do something to fill my time, I'll drift back into drug use. Quite obviously, that's obviously what happened. So when I first recovered, I accessed NA quite a bit, to be honest. But it's just one my way. Do you know
what didn't you like? Because a lot of people, do you know, go to NA and it's like.
Well, this is it. I mean, I don't want to say anything against NA because I think when it works, it really, really works.
Yeah. It's just talking about personal experience. Why it's not worked for you?
It wasn't my way. I just think it wasn't my way. I think it's got a lot to do with individuality. I think for whatever reason, this is a self-assessment, how accurate it is. I'll have to let everybody else decide. But I just think I'm a bit more individual than most. And I think that NA suits... Again, I don't want to sound like a criticism, but I think it suits group mentality a little bit more.
Yeah, do you know what? Again...
Whereas, I'm the sort of person where if I'm in a group of people and they're all saying the same thing, I'll immediately want to say the opposite.
Yeah.
That's just in my nature.
You do, though. It's like, it's not like, you speak to one person and you spoke to them all, but meeting the people I have met in NA, it is this... I don't want to call it parroting as such.
It's a group thing.
It's a group thing, isn't it? Everyone seems to have... It's almost like a collective consciousness.
Sometimes I think it's easy to be negative about that sort of thing, but I just think some people need that sort of group support, the idea of what we're all on the same page. We're all saying the same thing.
I've said
just because I personally aren't like that, I can... Because when I first started going to NA, I liked it, and then I ended up hating it. And I got I found myself becoming vociferously anti-NA, and I thought that's not right. That's not right.
Why though? Why?
No, because we're all after getting people off drugs. This is the point. Yeah. So if people just need a different thing than I need, I can't be critical about that. I've just got to be open and acknowledge the fact that it works for some, and all power to it is the way I look at it now. And now I've got quite a positive view of NA. Yeah. So, I'm just going to start working at Rinio. I'm a peer mentor, and I always say to people now, give NA a chance, give it a go, because if it works, it fucking works. I've seen it transform people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
My only major criticism of NA, which I don't know, I feel like I've got to say this. I think sometimes people hang on too long. So when you get people who are 20 years clean and they're still going to a meeting every night, I sometimes think, mate, you've just changed your addiction there, mate.
I've had this conversation before. I always say it's a healthier addiction to have if you attend NA, 14 times a week.
Again, maybe I'm being a bit disingenuous because if somebody needs that, they need that. And if it's keeping them off drugs, it's keeping them off drugs.
This is the conversation I had in terms of like, when does recovery become recovered? Does it ever get to that point, or are you constantly 20 years later, do you still say, I'm in recovery? Do you still need that support?
I'm a horses for courses kind of guy, mate, these days. I just think whatever's necessary. If someone needs that, they need that.
They need that,
You know what I mean? So I'm trying not to judge. To me, it'd be a horror to think in 20 years' time I'm still sat at a meeting saying, I'm an addict. That would be a horror to me, because I would not want to self-label like that. I wouldn't want to... I won't be around in 20 years more than likely. I'm getting on a bit. But if I am around, I'll probably be on drugs for a entirely different reason, delivered by a doctor. But there we go. But no, I just think it's horses for courses these days, and I try and be as open and as generous as possible. And people just need. This is the way I look at it. Is everyone wants to get to the same place. There's just different We don't all start from the same place, so why would we all take the same route?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So some people just have a different route to get to the place we all want to get to.
I always say about the support network that comes with the fellowship. Like I always say, like, I'm almost envious of it to see how they embrace people and how they really support each other. And I get what you're saying. But I think I've said I'd love that in my life, to be honest.
Well, that's it.
That support network is incredible.
That's what I used to love at the beginning, was the kind of sense of camaraderie and that kind of fellowship concept. It's a great concept. So I don't want to sound like I'm knocking it, but I just don't think it's just not my way.
So how did you do it then? So you've gone to a few NA sessions, a few NA meetings. Yeah. It's not for you, but rather than go back to the drugs, which is what some people do, they might try and it's not worked. Oh God, back to square one. You didn't. You've obviously found a different way of.
I think working at Renew was a big part of it, to be honest.
Just been in that recovery environment.
Yeah, I love the feeling of responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like, I think, I just love that feeling of responsibility, and having that feeling of responsibility helps me not. Well, to be honest, I just think I was so ready to stop using drugs. It was just the next chapter. It was like that page has turned over. So I've not had any cravings or any real desire to use drugs, even when bad things have happened. You know, I was in. Because I'd managed to go right through my entire drug addiction without ever spending. When I spent one night in hospital to have a minor operation on my finger, but other than that, absolutely.
Wasn't drug related, was it?
No.
Okay, that's what I mean.
I snapped the tendon in the.
Oh, there you are then. So you've gone through because you've always.
No, but what I'm saying is I've not had any ill health which I thank the Lord for. Yeah. But I genuinely thank the Lord. But anyway, but earlier this year, I think I took 2022 as my year of illness, by the way, because
you was ill quite a lot.
Right away through addiction, I didn't have any illnesses whatsoever. Yeah. And yet, since I've got clean, I've had surgery for the first time ever. Umpteen calls, I think it was a masking, but I can't remember suffering with colds and things like that.
When I wouldn't have realised you had
loads of opiates.
You probably wouldn't have realised you had a cold.
If I had it, more than likely. But I'd never spent any time in hospital, and I ended up with having not just an ordinary appendectomy. I ended up with a necrotic appendix, so they literally had to do a big. I think it's about 11 inches long, the scar I've got.
Oh, really?
So they literally had to cut me open. I remember waking up from the operation. Because when I had the operation on my finger, I was middle of my addiction. So the woman sat there with the opiate painkillers ready to inject. I was like, I didn't do that because it hurt my hand.
But he was ready.
I was so ready for it. And I remember she put the full syringe in. I was saying, "Oh, it's still throbbing. Can I have a bit
still
more?"
Hurts. Give me more. Yeah.
And then I can remember as well getting back to my hospital bed and. Those medical opiates they give me weren't good enough, so I nipped into the bog to have a nip.
Oh Christ!
That's how mad things get. Well, but anyway, when I woke up from the appendectomy, the woman sat there with this syringe saying, "Oh," and I said, "Oh, if that's an opiate, I don't want it." And I was still groggy and I was turning down an opiate to it. And then post operation, they were offering me codeine. And stuff like that, and I was turning all that down. So
I remember you saying about this. I was quite surprised.
I did it with just paracetamol and ibuprofen. Yeah. And I was volunteering 2 days after I got over.
I know. I couldn't believe it when you came back and you said, "Oh, I've just." I was like, "How long you been?"
That was a test. I love testing myself now. I do now that I'm clean. I love it.
Yeah, pushing yourself.
Yeah.
So, for someone watching this, maybe going through heroin addiction now, can you talk us through what? Actually, tell you what, for someone who doesn't know what withdrawal is like, because there's a lot of misconceptions as to what withdrawal is like, and we've spoken about this before. Some people liken it to the flu. Do you know what is heroin withdrawal really like?
Well, I think there's two aspects of heroin withdrawal. There's the physical withdrawal side to it, which is really quite similar to the flu. I think it's like aches and pains, lack of appetite. And, all those sort of things that I think people do have quite an understanding about. But then when you think about it's the emotional side of giving up opiates, I think, or opiate withdrawal that's the most difficult to deal with. And people underestimate, I think, things like the insomnia that it brings. Now, everyone's familiar with having a sleepless night. And how even if you're not poorly, just tossing and turning all night is a very horrible and uncomfortable experience. I don't know if you've ever experienced it yourself, but it's not great if you can't get to sleep. Now, if you're in opiate withdrawal, you can literally go 6-7 days without getting a single wink of sleep. But you're also, at the same time, suffering with the physical.
Is that just because of the discomfort that you're in? Is that why?
No, I think it's just part of opiate withdrawal is you just cannot sleep. It's just sleep is just an alien. It's just impossible to sleep.
Yeah.
It seems strange when you talk about it to anyone who hasn't experienced it, just exactly how much insomnia you get in opiate withdrawal. But you can literally go 7 days, 8 days. I broke the world record for not sleeping. But it would not stand as a world record because it would be regarded as chemically assisted. Yeah. But I've gone more than 8 days without a single wink of sleep. Now, you give up even trying. Yeah. Like on the safe day, night 3, you think, I feel... And you feel like you can sleep. This is the weird thing about it. You're that tired, your body knows it needs to sleep. So you go to bed. And then you're just tossing and turning. But added to that as well, and something that people underestimate about... Because I think that one of the major symptoms of opiate withdrawal is anxiety, the levels of anxiety that you feel, which aren't necessarily delivered by any thing that you should, like it's like free-floating anxiety. There's nothing you can pinpoint that anxiety on. It's literally like having a little man in your stomach trying to scratch his way out like 24/7. And you literally can't get any rest. It's like normally when people people who have never experienced opiate withdrawal, what they do is they compare it with their own sufferings when they're ill, a little bit ill. Now, the fact of the matter is, no matter how ill you are with flu, you can get nice and warm under a duvet and derive some kind of comfort, even though you're feeling really poorly. You do get moments of respite where you feel a little bit.
When I'm ill, all I want to do is sleep, and all I do is sleep.
Yeah, well, this is the point. This is usually a person's defence mechanism for feeling ill is often falling asleep. Now, you can't. So the fact of the matter is, opiate withdrawal is absolutely unremitting in its discomfort. The way I often describe it is, it's like the absolute absence of anything that you could call comfort. Like the comfort is not even on the agenda. So you're feeling absolutely physically as uncomfortable as you could possibly imagine. You're feeling the highest levels of anxiety that you could possibly imagine, and also a mind that just will not stop. Do you know what I mean? So you've got that like there's just no area possible where you can get any respite from the discomfort. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost the absolute discomfort. I couldn't imagine a more uncomfortable experience.
The double side of that and why it is such a battle as well is because if you know what is causing all that discomfort, it's just a lack of opiate.
Yeah, that's it. It's always and your comfort's fat. You see, it's an absence of discomfort where your comfort is only 5 minutes away, a phone call away. Yeah, you know.
That's
another one of the battles.
Better.
Yeah, that's it.
That quickly. Yeah,
I mean, can you imagine if you had the real serious flu? And you laid in bed with a serious flu, feeling absolutely terrible, you feel absolutely shit, and you know all you have to do is make that normal phone call that you've made so many million times, and within 10 minutes, your relief is there. Who could resist that?
Yeah, no, I completely understand it.
That's another one of the reasons that makes opiate withdrawal so difficult, the fact that the comfort is so close, and yet the withdrawal itself, it's just absent.
On that subject as well, you just said it's such a phone call that you make 1,000 times before. Like before I started working in substance misuse services, I always thought heroin was something that was really hard to come by.
Nah,
it's so easy, isn't it? That's the scary thing.
It's as easy as getting a bottle of milk. The thing is, it depends on it depends on this is a weird one. Depends on the relationship we've got with your dealer and the type of dealer that you know and stuff like that. It's like I had 2 distinct periods in my opiate use. In the early days, it was your classic scratching money together to get a tenner bag and waiting under an underpass for some arsehole who would maybe leave you waiting 3 or 4 hours, literally at the mercy of. We used to call it powder power. So you'd get really low-level dealers who would, buying an eighth basically to fund their own habit and then chopping up so many bags so they could buy the next eighth, blah-de-blah-de. And that you'd get an awful lot of weird, we used to call it powder power, where your dealer would say, I'll meet you under the underpass at 8:30. This is at 8:30 in the morning. By midday, you're still there. You and 50 other people that are winding you fucking up because you're rattling. And there's all these irritating people that you wouldn't have nothing to do with. Except the only thing you've got in common is the fact that you all want heroin. So I had that period where, and that was quite nightmarish. Really.
Well, yeah, and it's quite the stereotypical view of a drug user as well, isn't it? I guess that sort of image.
Period.
So what's the second part then?
Well, basically, when I learned to grow weed.
Okay.
Basically. All the time I was an opiate user, I was also a weed user. They were my two drugs of choices. So it was opiates and weed. Opiates first, of course.
Of course, yeah.
But then any other money, I'd buy resin and then later on weed. And then I started growing weed. Only on a low level. I'm not saying I was greedy or anything like that.
You didn't have like a greenhouse full of it.
No, it was basically to fund my habit. It was 6 plants maximum,
Self-use
600 watt. Which is still, you can still turn around quite a lot of money. And plus, if you get, I don't want to give too many secrets away here, but there's a way of growing weed. So you're literally cropping every 8 weeks. Okay, So literally every 8 weeks, I'd have a crop that raised me I won't go specifics into money, but enough money so I could be really, really comfortable. And so money became plus part of the disguise of being a heroin user is the fact you're still getting your benefits, of course. So my rent was paid for, getting my benefits every 4 weeks, as well as growing weed on the side. So the cost prohibitive side of weed kind of disappeared. You know what I mean? And then also, once you've got enough money to start buying weight, then it's a totally different process because you're dealing in larger amounts of money. So it's not waiting for some powder power scumbag under an underpass. You're talking about someone who's making serious money, who's usually quite an efficient businessman. So when you make that phone call, it's literally, I'll be at your house in 10 minutes. I'll be at your house in 20 minutes, delivered.
Delivery service.
Yeah, it's like, what do they call these places that deliver takeaways?
Just Eat, Deliveroo.
Like Just Eat, for heroin. So it just became a complete one. Once I learned how to
There's like a hierarchy of drug use.
There is, absolutely there is. Absolutely.
I've never thought about it like
this
that.
is, people use the word drug culture real flippantly without realising it's a fucking culture. So it's got its lords, it's got its kings, it's got its serfs and its minions and all the rest of it. It's a culture in every sense of the word. And of course, the more money, exactly like in big culture, money talks. So if you've got money to buy bigger weight, just all the negotiating. Plus, the fact of the matter is, the more money you've got, the easier it is to source. Less tampered with, stepped on, we used to call it. Tampered with heroin, so the product gets better. Because that's the one less harmful.
People don't understand the quality, and someone said to me before that it was quite a flippant contour. The heroin they're dealing, it's probably like 2% heroin. The rest is just.
Well, it depends where this is the point. I think because I used to say this all the time, but I think that's because when people do the drug analysis on bits of powder that they get, they'll get low level stuff, the stuff that the average person's buying. Do you know what I mean? But it's not. Well, as well, I've got to say that things changed as soon as drugs became available on the internet. Because then you can get stuff direct from bloody Mexico or direct from Portugal.
It's mental how that actually gets through.
And for the last few years, the guy I used to get it off used to get it directly off the internet. You know what I mean? So it wasn't even what you'd call imported street heroin by any stretch of the imagination. You know what I mean? Like, I remember before when I did my detox that led to my first peer mentor course, when we met, some of the last heroin I ever did was what was it called? Black tar heroin from Mexico, which was some of the strongest I've ever used in my life. And this was at a period when everyone was saying heroin on the streets is rubbish, it's only 2%, blah, blah, blah. People are psychologically addicted, not physically addicted, all this sort of stuff. That was some of the strongest heroin I've ever got in my life. And it was also water soluble, by the way, so you didn't need citric with it as well. So it was a completely different stuff.
But that is mind-blowing as well. Do you know what? Talking about culture, talk to me more about the culture in substance abuse, because we've had some good conversations about this in the past. There was a comment you made before about, we talk about stigma, and again, you're stereotypical substance misuser, heroin addicts under the underpass. They're looked at like shit, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas we've talked about these people at one point being salt of the earth.
Well, I don't remember what we were talking about.
Well, I think we was talking about World War II and things like that, wasn't we? This is it with the culture of it.
Well, sometimes I think that in drug treatment, the burden of responsibility being on the individual as somehow a flawed individual. They take drugs because they're a flawed individual, whether you call it moral dysfunction or educationally challenged or whatever reason. Sometimes the burden of responsibility is put on the individual. Whereas to me, I just think it's much more of a social problem than people give it credit for. And if you look at when you think about the cliched under the underpass heroin user, that's basically working class users you're talking about, because there wasn't that kind of stigma in the 60s when heroin users were more likely to come from universities, college students, and be middle class. It wasn't until after the dance music revolution, whatever period of history it was when it happened, that it entered the working classes, that you got this kind of scumbag, chavvy heroin user concept. Yeah. And I just think it's purely I'm trying to think about what the argument was while I was comparing them with the salt of the earth, because I think we're talking about the demographic being the sort of lowest earners in society, the people who are lowest in society.
There's not just lower class now, there's almost like another class below lower class.
Yeah, it's like a subclass, isn't it?
Exactly.
But when you think about it, again, the reasons that there's subclasses because of changes in demographic, like the industries that used to give these people employment have all disappeared and all this sort of thing. But I think the specific thing we were talking about was the idea of the poorest people in Britain at the moment are now regarded as chavvy scumbags.
Vilified by tabloid journalism and things. I think that's what we was talking about.
But then if you think about the same demographic 100 years ago, these were the brave lads that were going over the top to face a hail of German bullets and actually saved us from, in the First World War and stuff. So I just think, I don't think I put that point across as well as I did the first time we argued.
No, but anyway, you're right. You're right.
I just think that the idea of, I just think a lot of attitudes about people are socially driven. But everybody knows about chav culture.
Of course, yeah.
And I remember in the early noughties, there was every single TV channel had programs on about 15 kids and counting, and about
teenage pregnancies,
and just
16 and pregnant,
finger pointing and
this is it.
That word chav arrived from that sort of concept.
Vilifying and turning everybody against each other.
Well, I just think one of the facts about human beings is, for whatever reason, I think human beings can't help putting each other into castes, and as human beings, we seem to need this looking down, this group of people that we can look down on.
Because if we look down, then we're not looking up, are we? At the people.
I think if you're looking down, you're not looking at yourself, basically.
There's another point.
Also, it's a way of not facing your own flaws, because you can say, at least I'm better than him, or whatever. So I think there seems to me to be a real social need to cast a certain group as something you can point your finger at. And I see that all the time in drug use. I think an awful lot of the problems or the inability to deal with drug use is because of that finger pointing exercise and the idea that it's their fault, they're just scumbags. Do you know what I mean? People don't. Then you don't have to look at it any deeper. Or they're just nasty people, just horrible people. Yeah. You know what I mean? As if it's that simple.
Well, exactly. Right. So do you know what? I'm gonna finish on this, because obviously you started with me as you started your peer mentor training. You had a lapse. You disappeared for a while. Then your name popped up again, and it was like, oh, he's back, and you was doing really well. So I brought you back on as a peer mentor, and now you've got employment. So you're going to be working with Renew as well. Which is, as a volunteer lead, it's one of my favourite parts of the job, is seeing people go from the peer mentor training into a volunteer opportunities to developing skills and getting.
Well, I've taken your lead in that respect, Sam. I always encourage you. There was another fella today that I've said have a word with your case manager about getting on the next peer mentoring course.
Well, actually, I've got a date for it now, so I'll talk about that with you afterwards, because there'll be a few people that you can probably get from me. But so the employment, what made you want to get into paid? Because you've said yourself you've spent years without having a career. Do you know what made you want to move in? Because obviously volunteering is different. People volunteer not just to move into employment. Sometimes it is a case of just giving back, filling the time, and that was you for a while. Then I think something clicked with you where you was like, I'm gonna turn these skills that I've got into a job. What was it that made you want to get paid employment with the service?
Well, I think there's selfish reasons in as much as. Because I think that it's a really responsible job, and I also think you can end up engaged in a job that's on a kind of level that I couldn't get in any other way. Because I've got such a sketchy work history and stuff like that. If it weren't for working at Renew, there's very few places that even look at my CV without tearing it up and throwing it in the bin. So there's that selfish reason, I'll be honest. It's a way of getting a good rewarding job. Based on your experience. I haven't got that many options, to be honest. But also, my entire life I've had a fascination with the concept of drug use. So that's why I got into it in the first place. The concept of drug use in society has always fascinated me. So a lot of it's just to do with my own, as it were, personal interests. So it's almost like a proxy way of still keeping in the drugs world without having to do the nastiness of the drugs.
You've said this before.
But also I think I can prepare, I think I'm good at it.
Yeah, you've said this before about
I think I've got an awful lot of understanding about
homeless
drug use.
people. They're your people.
Not so much homeless people.
But substance misuse.
Well, it's not so much that. I just think it's my demographic. It's like I come from that same environment. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was brought up on Bransholme, which I suppose is one of the major areas of drug use. It's like the housing estate is a hotbed of drug use and dysfunctional behaviours these days, isn't it? So, and to a certain extent they feel like my people. It's just a strange thing to say. Yeah. But and again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about loving the feeling of responsibility.
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, all the old fellas used to fix stuff. You know what I mean? It's just what all blokes did. Yeah. They potted in the shed, fixing stuff. Every old bloke potted in his shed, fixing something, whether it be the TV, washing machine, vacuum cleaner, or they always made stuff. They fiddled about, they potted about in the shed, fixing stuff. These days we're living like a throwaway culture where nothing gets fixed. If something's broke, throw it away. Yeah. So the only thing that people think they can fix anymore is other people, I think. Yeah. which is weird. Sometimes it annoys me. This the only thing we can fix now is other people. And it can be that you can't fix yourself, mate. So you can fix somebody else. But there is that. I'm not saying I love broken things. Yeah. But I kind of do. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because I know the reasons that I can't think I know the reasons that they're broken.
You can relate.
Yeah. So if I can help fix them, then it's just such a rewarding job to do. Not that there's been that much evidence so far of fixing that many, but at the same time, I just love presenting a space where people can feel safe.
Well, I've had service users tell me how much you've been helpful to them and how much they've appreciated the time you've given them. I often get feedback like that, so it shows that you can build connections with people and help people, which is what you want to do. Right, I'm going to finish off with a set of 10 random questions, actually, not in relation to anything that we've spoken about so far. And these are a series of questions that I ask everybody at the end of our podcast. But for you, in particular, Peter, what is your favourite word?
I haven't got one.
You ain't got one?
No, I love words. I just love words, so I use that many.
Do you have a link?
You know what? It'd be churlish to pick one.
Churlish? I like that.
That's ungentlemanly.
What is your least favourite word?
Again, I haven't particularly got one, but I think this is quite a trite answer, but anywhere that diminishes other human beings, I suppose, would be a good answer.
Tell me something that excites you.
It's human beings.
Tell me something that doesn't excite you.
It's human beings.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love music. That's the answer I give to that.
You said you went through a lot of phases of music. Do you still got a broad range, or?
Yeah, look, I absolutely love music. I love that. Like a good week to me is finding some new music.
Yeah.
Something I noticed since I've been doing this music group is most people's enjoyment of music is dependent on the familiarity of that music.
Yeah.
And I think people go through a period between the age of about 15 and 20 where the music that they like then, they listen to for the rest of their life and never change that musical taste one bit. To me, I just love finding new music. I love unusual music. So to me, any music that's... I've got a feeling I'm going to preempt your next question.
Go on.
You're going to ask me now what noise that I don't like, aren't you? Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll answer that question now then. I don't like cliched commercial music, the music that everybody else listens to.
Like pop culture music, chart music?
No, not necessarily pop music. I love an awful lot of pop culture music, but I just don't... I've got an aversion to listening to the same music that everybody else listens to. I really have.
To be honest, I found was that with some like chart music, I appreciate it years later when it's not being played on the radio over and over and over again. I can come back to songs and go, actually, I like that. But at the time I hate it because it was just constantly battered into me. Do you know? What's your favourite curse word? Nice. I like that one. What profession other than your own...
Do you want me to not tell you why it's my favourite?
Go on, actually, tell me. Yeah.
The reason it's my favourite...
I might have to pass this out, but we're going to go...
If I say real slowly, we'll be able to read my lips. Yeah. No, the reason is because I just think it's a really strange phenomenon, I think, that beautiful thing that we all came out of, that we're all chasing all the time, that does nothing but create all these human beings that I love, is everybody's the word that everyone hates, and is regarded as the most offensive word. Yeah. And yet, if you think of this, is going to sound a bit toxic masculinity, and it's not particularly meant to, but let's face it, most of the horrors of the world do come from men. And when you think of the words for the male genitalia, like prick and knob, these are really regarded as inoffensive words, and yet it's the blokes that make all the bombs. And even the fact that bomb isn't an offensive word, and gun isn't an offensive word, but the source of all creation is the most offensive word for everybody. And people use this, it's because it sounds horrible. It's because it's that guttural, horrible, guttural sound. But then when you think of having a whole accent, we say things like, well, I couldn't do that if I tried.
Exactly.
So we use that noise all the time without it being offensive and guttural. So I think that's just an excuse. Yeah. So it's always intrigued me, the fact that beautiful thing.
It's not half as offensive as it used to be, and I think do you know what? It often seems to be an older generation that's offended by it. But I don't think any word is offensive until you apply context.
Yeah, that's it. So the offensive words are the words that are delivered aggressively and with meanness of spirit.
And it's the intentions of how those words are used to make people feel, I guess. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I think I will one day. Yeah? What the answer I'm going to give. I've always harboured an ambition to write a really good book. So I suppose writer would be the obvious answer to that. It's a bit lofty, but...
No, I like the fact that you said you're going to do it one day as well. Tell me something that you'd not like to do, profession-wise, work-wise.
I nearly said return to drug use, but something I'd not like to... Practically most professions, I just think...
I think you'd make a great accountant.
Accountant, I couldn't think about worse.
We'll go with accountant.
This is the point. When I talk about the fact that I never really wanted to do anything, and nothing really appealed to me. And I think it's so not. I don't think there's very much that I'd want to do. Fair. I'm really happy with what I'm just about to set about doing, to be honest. I'm really looking forward to becoming a worker at Renew.
I'm looking forward to having you on there. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I think it's an absolute nonsense to suggest God uses anything that would resemble words.
What do you think he'd use?
No idea, but the idea, you know, this nonsensical idea that because the Bible says in one part that we're made in God's image means that he must be in our image then is a nonsense. I wouldn't have such a small view of what God is.
What if when you get there, God just opens his gates and calls you a c***? Would you be happy with that?
I'd wink. So, lovely to meet you, mate.
We'll leave it there.
I've thought about you for years. Lovely to meet you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on, Peter. Much appreciated. Thank you. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, don't forget to check out our other episodes and hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Our name is CGL Hull. That's CGLHULL. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, and Google Music. So please like and subscribe to receive regular updates. You can also search for Believe in People podcast on your favourite listening device, and if you could leave us a review, that will really help us with getting our message out there and rising up the daily podcast charts.